Have you ever wondered what it takes to escape from prison? On April 5, 1998, a man in his 40s was arrested by the US Marshals and, after a lengthy trial, sentenced to more than 144 years in prison. The reason? For several years, Stephen J. Russell had been taunting the authorities by easily escaping from several of the most secure prisons in the United States. Not once, not twice, but 4 times. Yes, you heard that right, 4 times. In a place where security is extreme and control measures are rigorous, Russell showed that there are no barriers that cannot be overcome by a clever and determined mind, escaping from one prison after another as if it were child's play. What strategies did he use to evade surveillance and walk freely through the prison corridors? What motivated this man to defy all limits to gain his freedom? How did he do it? The origin. Born on September 14, 1947 in Elizabeth City, a small town in the state of North Carolina, no one could have imagined that Stephen J. Russell was destined to become one of the most famous and recognized con artists and masters of deception in US history. During his brief but fascinating criminal career, Russell achieved significant successes, such as stealing approximately $800,000 from a company and defrauding the government on more than one occasion. However, for at least the first 30 years of his life, Stephen Russell, a brilliant and ingenious man with an IQ of about 163 points higher than figures like Albert Einstein or Bill Gates, didn't seem like the type of person one would imagine capable of building a lengthy criminal record. Russell's early childhood was a natural one. His father owned a family fruit distribution business called D.S. Russell & Sons. His mother worked as a nurse, and he had an older brother as a constant playmate and support. In fact, both brothers worked odd jobs together to help the family, and during his childhood, Stephen Russell wanted to be a garbage collector instead of going into the family business. A rather strange and different dream, no doubt. However, things took a turn for Russell when he discovered that he was adopted. His biological mother, a woman named Brenda Basham, had given him and his brother up for adoption because she couldn't take care of them. This revelation deeply affected Stephen, who quickly became troubled, regularly fighting with other children and even starting fires on more than one occasion. Concerned, his parents tried to help him through counseling with a local preacher, but soon after, Russell set fire to a classmate's locker and nearly burned down a wall at his school. Things got tense, and soon the local police convinced our protagonist's parents to send him first to a psychiatric hospital and then to a juvenile detention center called Hanover Children's School, a place that years later he would recall as the worst in the world, and where he apparently discovered 2 things that would shape his future. He discovered that he was a homosexual and that he seemed to have a natural gift for captivating and manipulating people. A gift he didn't hesitate to use. After 4 months in Hanover, it was discovered that Russell needed braces, and he quickly realized that every time he complained about the pain the braces supposedly caused, the counselors would take him to the nearest orthodontist about 30 miles away. Whether it was a simple prank to test these newfound abilities or just to break the monotony, Russell began to complain constantly to get free trips to the dentist. 5 months later, after countless trips to the dentist, the counselors released him, and he returned home. There, he quickly secured a position in the family business. From that point on, things seemed to be moving toward a more normal life. Gradually, Stephen's minor offenses became a thing of the past, and years later, after graduating from high school, he was promoted to a full-time administrative position in the family business. He became a role model and even expressed interest in becoming a police officer, although he was motivated more by the hope of finding his biological family in the job than by a calling. While searching for a position with the police department, he met a young woman named Debbie, whom he married 17 months later. The couple soon moved to Virginia Beach, where they began a virtually idyllic life. In 1979, after the birth of their daughter, Stephen began playing the organ at his local church, became a volunteer deputy with the county police department, and became, at least in appearance, the epitome of a model husband, father, and neighbor. For one thing, the successful family business was not as clean as it seemed. D.S. Russell & Sons was, in fact, one of the places where Stephen began to hone his skills in the world of crime, especially white-collar crime. Stephen was not as deeply involved in the crimes of the family business, and when those crimes came to light, he agreed to cooperate with the federal authorities by providing everything he knew via a microphone in meetings. As a result, unlike his father and other members of the company, Stephen was not convicted or fined for his complicity, giving him a certain reputation as an informant. On the other hand, Russell was not exactly the ideal husband, which he managed to hide from friends and family for a while. The family business had gone bankrupt, and his reputation as a snitch prevented him from getting a job in a similar business. His background also disqualified him from government employment, so in 1984, he moved to Houston, Texas by himself in search of work at Cisco. During this time, he enjoyed his bachelor life away from his family, openly embracing his sexuality and indulging in a life of luxury and extravagance, while his wife and daughter waited in Virginia for their new home to be completed. However, in early 1985, when his daughter and wife joined him, Russell would once again have to hide his true sexuality and relegate his lifestyle for another 15 years until his wife Debbie discovered it. The way he was discovered would also be crucial. Russell was returning from an adventure when, after a night of heavy drinking, he crashed his car and spent 8 weeks in intensive care. During this time, his wife took charge of the family finances and discovered that Stephen's credit card bills contained numerous charges for hotel stays. In 1986, after discovering the deception and once he was well enough to care for himself, Debbie left Stephen, who was forced to confess his infidelity and sexuality. Soon after, the marriage dissolved, and Stephen moved to Los Angeles, where he would first use his chameleon-like skills in a way that would make him famous. He simply pretended to be one of his former employees and called a new company, where he sought employment. His goals were clear. Using all his charm and cunning, Russell spoke highly of himself, and unexpectedly, they hired him. Stephen's position in this company was significant. However, a year later, he was fired. Russell always claimed that he was fired because of his sexuality. However, the truth seems to be that the company discovered Stephen's ruse and fired him. The first escape. The first time Russell used his scamming skills to escape prison was, like all the others, a tragic love story. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Russell's criminal career began as a conman, a profession in which he demonstrated unparalleled skill and effectiveness. Russell began with small and innocent scams. The first of these was pretending to slip and fall in a supermarket in order to claim insurance money. Initially, the trick worked wonders, and Russell was able to collect the money. However, as the investigation progressed, the state realized that it had been a scam, and Russell was found guilty of fraud and sentenced to 6 months in jail. Over the years, his sentence would grow and grow. Although his sentence was relatively short, Stephen had no intention of staying in prison for long, so he began planning the robbery that would mark the beginning of his criminal career as such, his first major escape. Russell's partner, young Jimmy Campbell, a bellhop in Palm Beach, was seriously ill with HIV, and the prognosis was not good. So on May 13, 1992, after only 4 weeks in jail, Stephen Russell walked out of Harris County Jail in Texas and escaped in a clever but simple way. While in jail, Russell stole civilian clothes one by one and gradually hid them in his cell. Then, undetected by anyone in the jail, he stole a walkie-talkie and waited until the opportunity presented itself. Taking advantage of a guard's oversight, Stephen removed his prison clothes, changed into civilian clothes, and, using his stolen walkie-talkie, walked out of prison pretending to be an undercover police officer. No one in the prison suspected him until it was too late. By then, the whereabouts of Russell, who would go on to go by names like Houdini, King Kong, and many other aliases, were a complete mystery. A new love and more escapes. For an interesting period of time, Russell kept a low profile and took care of his friend Jimmy, who, unfortunately for both of them, died of complications related to the AIDS virus exactly 3 weeks after Russell was arrested again and transferred back to the Harris County Jail in Texas. However, scams, escapes, and of course love were far from over for King Kong. During his time in prison, Russell met another inmate, a man named Philip Morris, with whom he deeply fell in love, and a new chapter in Russell's life began. Such an incredible and passionate chapter served as the inspiration for the 2009 film I Love You, Philip Morris, starring actors Jim Carrey and Ewan McGregor. After both served their respective sentences, Russell returned to his old ways. This time, using all his cunning and wit, Stephen falsified his resume and, through a few phone calls, impersonated some of his former bosses to secure a position as Chief Financial Officer at NAM, or North American Medical Management, a prestigious medical management company in the United States. Russell was well aware that he wasn't necessarily giving up the demand of his job, but he didn't really care. Using a false identity, Russell and Morris, who had joined him in his new scam, embezzled approximately $800,000 from NAM before being discovered and arrested. Upon his arrest, authorities quickly discovered his true identity. He was returned to the Harris County Jail, where he was placed under strict supervision for his previous escape and faced a hefty bail of over $900,000. Despite his arrest and conviction, Russell was unwilling to spend more time in prison and once again managed to secure his freedom. From inside the prison, Stephen took on the task of reducing his hefty bail. The first thing he did was to impersonate the judge handling the case and, using his identity, contact the Harris County clerk. Russell played his role so convincingly that he convinced the clerk's office that the monstrous $950,000 bail imposed on him was a mistake, and that the amount should be reduced to just $45,000. Then, with the help of some friends, our protagonist got the bail money. He paid it, and just before the authorities realized they had been duped again, Stephen was released and fled to Florida to spend time with his beloved Philip Morris. Shortly thereafter, barely a week after the previous escape, Philip Morris and Stephen Russell were found by authorities in a hotel room in West Palm Beach, Florida, and both were arrested. This time, however, things were different, at least in some respects. Texas authorities had grown tired of this Houdini, a genius con artist and incurable romantic who kept escaping from prison as if it were nothing more than a playground. So on this occasion, Russell wasn't sent to the Harris County Jail, as he had been on previous occasions, but to the Maxim Security Estelle Unit, a much more secure facility from which they trusted he wouldn't escape. At the same time, Russell received a 45-year sentence, much harsher than the last time. Morris, on the other hand, was also convicted and charged with complicity and inciting Russell to commit his frauds and escapes, but his sentence was much lighter. Everything could have been normal this time, but once again, the authorities underestimated both Russell's cunning and his passionate love for Morris. When Philip's sentence was served and he was released, Russell took it upon himself to do whatever it took to get out of prison and be with him. Clearly, he wasn't going to wait 45 years to be reunited with the love of his life, so once again, he prepared to escape. His first step was to secretly steal all the green markers he could find without anyone noticing. The clever imposter gradually collected numerous markers in his cell, and when he finally had enough, he stole a generic prison uniform and used the markers to dye it in his cell's bathroom. Once the uniform was finished, Russell put it on and walked out the front door, even in a maximum security prison, simply pretending to be a member of the prison medical staff. Once out of jail, Russell walked and walked until he reached a house, where he convinced a man to give him a ride downtown. Once there, he took a cab to Houston and found the man he loved, Philip Morris, who was out on bail awaiting trial for his involvement in the Nam case. Their relationship was not at its best, but after much persuasion, Stephen convinced Morris to flee with him to the city of Biloxi, Mississippi. There they went unnoticed for a while until Russell was recognized and arrested by a member of the U.S. Marshals while gambling in a casino. Shortly thereafter, Philip Morris was also located and arrested, and both were sent back to a maximum security prison in Texas. There, this modern-day Houdini was tried for the third time. He was sentenced to an additional 45 years in prison for this latest escape. It seemed like it was all over for Russell. The authorities, apparently as tired as he was of chasing, catching, and chasing again, would spare no resources or precautions to prevent this man from escaping again. Our imposter had no choice but to await the day of his death behind bars. However, Stephen Russell had shown that he was not a man who would give up easily, especially when he was once again separated from the man he loved and from whom the world seemed determined to keep him away. So, one last time, Russell set out to prepare one last escape. One last grand performance, hard to believe in this day, almost inexplicable in some of its steps, designed to finally tire the authorities of his pursuit. He would fake his own death, and he would do it in a big way. The last grand act. Russell had escaped 3 times. It was an impressive feat, but one that posed more than one problem. And the problem was that he had escaped 3 times. Russell had only been able to escape because, after each of his escapes, he was quickly found and, once found, locked up again. There was no point in escaping a 4th time, unless, of course, he made sure not to be arrested again. So, once back in prison, Stephen began his ultimate performance, faking symptoms of the AIDS virus. The first step was to make himself look like a very sick man. To do this, he started taking laxatives every day, secretly, of course, to lose weight very quickly. Then, in a way that remains unexplained to this day, Russell managed to access all of his medical records and, once in possession of them, proceeded to alter and falsify them to make the results match those of an HIV patient, even though he did not have the disease. Soon after, Stephen Russell looked more like a skeleton with barely any skin than a human being. His weight was far from healthy, and his physical condition had deteriorated. It wasn't just the appearance. His deteriorating health was clearly evident. In reviewing his medical records, everything seemed to add up. Finally, in March 1998, Stephen Russell was transferred to a palliative care center. There, he would simply live out the rest of his short life before dying under the attentive care of doctors. Everything seemed perfect, but behind this frail and haggard man was a perfectly healthy man who would make a full recovery in a matter of days or weeks. Even in a place that houses prisoners, security is much more relaxed and reduced in a palliative care center. Once transferred, Russell waited a little while, just the minimum necessary to feel barely recovered, and then escaped. Of course, this brilliant escape would attract the attention of the authorities far more than any of his previous escapes. To shake off the police for good, Stephen Russell falsified his death certificate and made sure it reached the courts in Texas. No one, no matter how skilled, could escape death. And Russell knew no one would care about him once he was dead. The problem was that the man had developed a reputation as a con man and escape artist. If he had managed to escape from prison, not once but twice, and fooled the authorities on more than one occasion, what would have guaranteed that it wasn't another scam? There were still people who weren't entirely sure that Stephen was as dead as the certificate said, so they took on the task of investigating deeply to find out if the man was dead or not. The investigation eventually revealed the ruse, and the authorities went hunting for Russell. The manner in which Russell was discovered is equally impressive. Russell had escaped justice, but once free, Stephen faced an unpleasant problem. He was free, but his beloved Morris was still behind bars. What was the point of being free while the person he loved was slowly withering away in prison? With that in mind, Morris returned to prison, this time voluntarily, though not as an inmate. In an attempt to get Morris out of jail and at the same time visit and see him after a long time, Russell managed to forge a law license. He then called the Estelle unit, where Morris was serving his sentence, and pretended to be a judge issuing a warrant for Morris's transfer to a Dallas jail. The purpose of this transfer was for him to receive a visit from his attorney. However, when the time came for the meeting, Morris realized the man who had come to see him was not a lawyer. It was Russell who, disguised as a lawyer, went to the prison to visit the man he loved. US Marshals visited the prison to find that Russell was gone. He then dropped off the radar for a period of time. In the days that followed, in an attempt to make some quick money before disappearing, Stephen took various actions, including trying to get a loan at a Bank of America branch using a false identity. Although he was able to escape by feigning a heart attack, Stephen was discovered by the authorities. It was known that he was alive, and days later, despite all his efforts, he was arrested for the fourth and final time. The short but fascinating criminal career of Stephen Russell ended that day, and despite the ingenuity he had shown on previous occasions, our protagonist would not be able to escape again. The authorities in Texas, a state that is particularly harsh when it comes to the penal and prison systems, were determined that this strange Houdini would not embarrass them again. For this reason, Stephen Russell was sentenced to more than 144 years in prison, adding up both his crimes as an imposter and the punishment for his repeated escapes, a sentence that many organizations considered excessive for a man who had never committed violent crimes. Currently at the age of 66, Stephen Russell has been incarcerated since 2010 in the Alan B. Polunsky Unit, a maximum security prison where he is monitored 24 hours a day, with only 1 hour away from isolation where he can shower, exercise, and get some sunlight. And so ends the exciting, tragic, and incredible story of Stephen Russell, the master escape artist.